Hello, this is Paul Lennon, tape 15, with the story of my life in the Legion of Christ, with a very strange and somber name, originally published as Our Father Maciel, who art in bed, a naive and sentimental Dubliner in the Legion of Christ. And just to make sure that you believe me, I'm wearing kind of a more of a Guatemalan tie here. The shirt is of the native species, shall we say, and let me mention in passing that our president here, Dr. Gematei, is doing a great job, president of Guatemala, in containing the virus. We are in 100 or 200 or something, like very low number of confirmed cases, and only a few, a couple of 10 or 20 that I know of, maybe even less deaths from the virus. So this man is doing a great job, and you know, these humble countries sometimes do much better than the great powers that be. Uh, anyway, we were talking about me being in the rainforest, being in Quintan Roo, and there really being able to overcome my some serious bouts of depression that I had for many years while I was in the Legionaries of Christ. It would seem, if we look at this objectively, that the Legion of Christ did not agree with me, but nobody told me that. And I was not really in touch with my deeper self, with my own self. I had put it away somewhere uh, on a shelf when I entered, and other things and other ideas had overtaken my mind, my conscious mind. I have a photograph here from the original edition of the book, which shows me uh with Don Florentino, and we're in the rainforest, and somebody took this photo. Maybe it was our friend Eulogio, my sacristan, and he, as you can see, Don Florentino is the real thing, and he has his, not a very big one, but a regular machete in his hand, which is used to to open your way to, you know, make your way cut your way through the rainforest, because sometimes the trees or the branches or the shrubs are very dense, and you have to try to cut your way through. Very, very exciting. It's like in the movies, and I was there. Isn't that wonderful? Going on to chapter 8 in my memoir called Resisting. And in case I didn't say so, this is tape number 15. Excuse me. We start with Siddhartha as usual. At times, he heard within him a soft, gentle voice which reminded him quietly, complained quietly, so that he could hardly hear it. Then he suddenly saw clearly that he was leading a strange life, that he was doing many things that were only a game, that he was quite cheerful and sometimes experienced pleasure, but that real life was flowing past him and did not touch him. Like a player who plays with his ball, he played with his business, with the people around him, watched them, derived amusement from them, but with his heart, with his soul nature, he was not there. His real self wandered elsewhere, far away, wandered and on invisibly, and had nothing to do with his life. End of quotation. This chapter is called also, subtitle, Director of the School of Faith, Mexico City. This is 1976 to 82. Director of the School of Faith, The Glory Without the Power. So as you can see, I've borrowed a title from Graham Greene, The Glory Without the Power. Because of his success in religious education and of his docility to his superiors, in mid-1975, Paul on the Missions was chosen by Father Maciel to set up a religious education center for adults in Mexico City. Assisted by Patrick, a 6'4", bright ex-legionary from Philadelphia, Paul opened the School of Faith officially in January 1976. It soon began to prosper, achieving relatively quickly the status of Pontifical Catecheitcal Institute. Forgive the pomposity of it, but that's what it was called, Pontifical Catecheitcal Institute. Paul had been instructed by his superior general, Father Maciel, to consult with the local uh, territorial director, as they're called in the Legion, not provincials, territorial director, uh, Father Alfonso Samaniego, for help with launching Nuestro Padre Maciel's latest brainchild. Father Alfonso's fame, knowledge, and politeness had preceded him. As an elder brother, he gave Paul some sage advice regarding the Mexican women from prominent rich families he had cultivated for years. So he had these ladies in spiritual direction, and now at this time he was going to look for a place for them to be active, to have their apostolate, to do their work, their spiritual work. And the School of Faith actually was a good field for them. His advice, among other things, women would not be so helpful in the school. Oh, excuse me. Older women would not be helpful in the school because of their physical condition and the excessive attention they required. Mujeres son muy complicadas. The wise clerical advice here. Paul should avoid menopausal women for the same reason. He would be looking for women in their 30s. These, on the other hand, had a drawback of being problematic, and some of their marriages were in bad condition. But they were energetic and go-getters. Although Paul would have to invest time in them, which Father Alfonso maybe didn't have, it could be worth the while to invest time and energy with them and get their help in launching the School of Faith. Soon Paul and Patrick were invited to the house of Sumaya Domit de Slim, mark the name, spouse of Carlos Slim Elu, in Lomas de Chapultepec. He was at one time the richest man in the world, Carlos Slim. In the beautiful neighborhood of Lomas de Chapultepec, where the School of Faith had its house. She had gathered a bunch of her friends. I think they played cards together. This presentation netted half a dozen intelligent, enthusiastic, and hardworking women who turned out to be very productive and ensure the school's eventual success. Paul spent hours preparing lessons, teaching students, and training his core group of future instructors. Paragraph. Social doctrine of the Church, a taboo subject. The Legion looked at that subject very leerily, Maciel, shall we say, and I believe that it still does the same thing. The Legion is not big on pushing the social doctrine of the Church. The Legion is not into reforming society. The Legion is not into the revolution of the poor and all that kind of thing. No. Anyway, this will give you a little example. As Paul pulled together the curriculum, texts, and questionnaires, he returned to Father Alfonso. Paul, as a faithful son of the Second Vatican Council, during his forays down to the Libreria Parroquial, the local bookstore, Paul found sound and attractive texts to cover introductory courses on the Bible, the Creed, the teaching on Jesus Christ, Christology, moral theology. Now, in this case, because it's a very complex subject, Paul chose a synopsis of the groundbreaking summary of modern Catholic doctrine, the pastoral constitution on the Church in the modern world, to us insiders, Gaudium et Spes. The joys and hopes is the way that beautiful document begins. Why complicate matters? Someone already had written a synopsis of it. The School of Faith course would shadow closely the document's three parts: person, family, and society. Father Alfonso had a quibble. Everything was fine, except that third part, the section regarding the Church's social doctrine. He wondered whether Paul needed to include that. No sé si eso conviene. Beautiful Legion word is conviene. Is it convenient? It may not be convenient. Weren't the articles of the creed enough? A school of faith, let's do the creed, whatever they are, 38 articles? I'm not sure. I never counted them. As I replied very caustically to one of my students once who asked me the question in the school of faith. They were a very pious person. Padre, how many dogmas are there in the Catholic Church? I was really getting into trouble, and I replied, I'm not sure, I never counted them. But I knew that the main stuff was in the creed. I mean, I wasn't that totally ignorant. And wasn't this the school of faith? Asked Father Alfonso. What need was there of the Church's social doctrine? That would be uncomfortable for the students from the upper social echelons. Paul could well imagine that, and he was not looking forward to expounding on the great social encyclicals of the last popes, John the 23rd and Paul the 6th, to such a select audience. Gaudium et Spes reformulated such lapidary doctrines as the universal destination of all wealth and the Christian's fundamental's moral obligation to share his wealth with those less fortunate. A truth as plain as morning sun to all Catholics, but not to the Legion and to the leaders it cultivates. The Lovely Ladies of Lomas. This is not going to be romantic, but it's called The Lovely Ladies of Lomas. We Irish, we love alliteration. In Mexico, El Padre, or rather El Padrecito, as he is called in the diminutive, affectionate form, is an institution that crosses even the rugged barriers of social class. In most quarters of Mexico, despite a history of government anti-clericalism, you may not have studied your Mexican history, the priest is a beloved and revered key person in the community. Mexicans will open up to him when life's troubles overwhelms them. They will approach the Padrecito anywhere and any time to request un consejo, a concrete piece of advice. Padre, necesito un consejo. It's pretty overwhelming sometimes for their very personal problems, and take it to heart. A kind and available padre experienced this on numerous occasions during his pastoral life. On the occasion of the first communion of a child, for example, the most lukewarm Catholic man will summon up the courage, swallow his machismo, kneel before the Padrecito in front of everybody, and ask for God's forgiveness. Before getting married by the church, because in Mexico everybody can get married by the civil court, but when they're really serious about this girl that they want to marry, who is to become la madre de mis hijos, the mother of my children, they may want the good old Catholic wedding. The most freewheeling groom gets down on his knees and tries to cleanse his soul because he really loves this woman, the future mother of my children. A little concession to machismo, perhaps, but also submission to the man of God. Thus, a few months into his position at the School of Faith, Paul had a large clientele of pretty and sometimes pretty messed up women, whereas their spiritual directors from the Regnum Christi, the movement, so these people had already been enrolled in the Regnum Christi, they had been recruited maybe into the lay movement, perhaps by Father Alfonso or by other legionaries. At 1970 now, the lay movement Regnum Christi, or the kingdom, whatever they call it in English, is making its first big strides in Mexico. Spain will enter there, and not so soon, not so long after, actually, even before that, a little bit, in Ireland. Dalriada, I think the house was called. Whereas their spiritual directors with the Regnum Christi movement simply responded with formulas to their questions, Paul would learn to listen to their raw needs. He had no formal training beyond a course on pedagogic psychology given in Latin by a French-speaking Jesuit in Rome, and his truncated studies from Southern Connecticut State College. He might have picked up a little bit of psychology at that time from some of his teachers. Here was the frustrated counselor finally coming into his own. He could empathize with their pain. Being sought after by these attractive and intelligent women must have increased his self-esteem and self-confidence, making him feel more competent and attractive. Paul was never privy to the financial wranglings behind his work. He knew the School of Faith had started off apparently with a loan from the Anáhuac University, which Maciel had founded a few years earlier in Mexico, the first big university that Maciel was to create with the help of a Mexican banker, Espinosa Iglesias, Don Manuel Espinosa Iglesias, who was a big shot in Jenkins holdings or investments. But he had never been directly involved in the financing of the school. He had a benefactor, Don Francisco, and his wife, who were his known benefactors, but Paul did not know the amount of their donations and had no right to ask for any explanations regarding financial management from his taskmaster. A couple of years after helping Paul found the School of Faith, Patrick, his sidekick, left for greener pastures. By 1978, Father Maciel was playing hardball. Paul, the School of Faith needs to be financially independent. You have to pay the loan back to the Anáhuac University. You cannot be a burden for the Legion. So who helped poor old impractical Paul solve that problem? At that time he was joined by another ex-Legion seminarian, Iliano Piccolo, still working for the Legion up there in Monterrey, Mexico. He was a great asset to the School of Faith, taking over teaching several subjects in the curriculum. A gifted teacher and well-liked, for the most part he was helpful and supportive. Much later, when things started getting sticky for Paul in his relationship with Father Maciel, it seemed that the Maciel would use Iliano's monthly reports instead of Paul's to get the lowdown on what was happening at the school. Won't say more. Anyway, when it came to fundraising, the lovely ladies of Lomas were needed. They were the ones who organized Nina Ricci fashion show, Pret-à-Porter, at the Maria Isabel Sheraton Hotel on Paseo de la Reforma. These ladies were into it. Paul's religious superior reminded him the rules did not allow him to be present for that, but he learned that they had been very successful, bringing in several hundred, if not a few $1,000s. All proceeds were duly deposited in the Legion coffers, and so Paul heaved a sigh of relief regarding his financial burdens. Those ladies were efficient, and when it came to spreading the School of Faith to the Mexican provinces, along came Mr. and Mrs. Labarte to take Father Paul and his team to lead weekend workshops in the provinces. Irapuato, Querétaro, lovely Querétaro, Aguascalientes, and San Luis Potosí, really the heartland of Mexico, which I always recommend visiting. Paul had contacts in Cancun and Quintan Roo to launch the Catholic adult education school there, but he was learning to rely heavily on the laity. Others came from above, help came from below. Next little paragraph, disagreeing. The School of Faith, as originally presented by Father Maciel and as implemented by Paul, had a church-wide dimension. It was meant to train religious instructors for Catholic parishes and dioceses, and this, from Paul's point of view, involved collaboration with the religious education centers of neighboring parishes, and dioceses. It was also a school to catechize many parents whose children attended Legion schools. Because of the quality of the program and instructors, the School of Faith soon had Regnum Christi, the Legion's lay movement members from young women's and men's sections thronging to the center. Some students favorably compared our house, Sierra Vertientes, our school, to the duller formation that they received in the official classes of the Regnum Kingdom. The School of Faith was also co-ed, a place where both sexes could mingle naturally, safely, and spontaneously. Paul was hearing rumblings in the distance